Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Monday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma, and it's good to be back. Now, over the weekend, my wife and I were tremendously blessed and honored to travel to Asheville, North Carolina, and there we were interviewed by Rick Welch and a group of other believers. They wanted me to give my testimony. How did I arrive at where I am in my eschatology? What's my to a certain extent, what's been my life journey? We had a great time. We had an interview of over 2 hours, and it was just a ball. I just have to tell you that. And this is kind of an eclectic group. Not everyone in the group is a full preterist, but they're a group of individuals who truly love the Lord. They're open to His Word. They discuss their differences, and it was a free flowing, fun type of quote interview, if you want to really call it that. And in addition to that, that's the reason for us being there. My wife and I got to go to the Biltmore mansion. Well, the Biltmore mansion, in case you did not know it, I didn't. I didn't. It was built by the Vanderbilts, the original Vanderbilt who became one of the wealthiest people in all of the world in the 19th century. It is an incredible estate. The guy, once he had his fortune, started buying up land near Asheville and originally purchased 125,000 acres. He built this French Renaissance, I guess you would say, style mansion out there. And it really is phenomenal. It took us an hour and a half, something like that, to go through go through the mansion on just looking. They have little controllers that you can use, and you're in room 3, you punch 3, and it gives you history in the background of that particular room and the appointments of the room, and I mean, just on and on. It was, I'm not a great tourist, okay? I'm really not. But this was phenomenal. And by the way, the foliage out there was beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. You'd be driving along the interstate I-26 or 40 or whatever it happened to be, and you'd have patches that were rather dull and, no big deal. And then all of a sudden, you'd hit an area where the foliage would just absolutely explode with color. So it was really, really an enjoyable time. Jan and I do not get to take an awful lot of time off just for ourselves, but this was, we had the day of work, if you please, and then the rest of the weekend was ours, and we just had a really, really fantastic time. So if you like architecture and history, and you get the opportunity to go to Asheville, North Carolina, and go through the Biltmore, it is definitely worth it. The rest of the grounds, the flower area is just breathtaking, and everywhere you went, the landscaping, everything about it demonstrate that Vanderbilt brought in the very best, the most knowledgeable, the most expert people to do the groundskeeping, to do the forestry control, to do the water control. It really was fantastic. Okay, got to get back into it. So again, happy Monday and welcome back. Now, I've been sharing with you the correlation between 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 and Isaiah chapter 66. The correlations are obvious. Isaiah 66 predicted the day of the Lord against Jerusalem and the temple. Number 2, against the persecutors of God's saints. It's the coming of the Lord in flaming fire. Well, Paul in 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 is predicting the coming of the Lord in flaming fire in vindication of the suffering saints at Thessalonica. So many commentators, the huge majority of commentators, acknowledge that 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 is drawing upon Isaiah. By the way, as I've shared with you, that Samuel Frost has a truly unique, unprecedented interpretation of 2 Thessalonians chapter 1. He says it's not the coming of the Lord in vindication of the martyrs. Absolutely not. The reference to the revelation of Jesus Christ from heaven has Christ going to heaven, not in vindication of the martyrs, but to receive the kingdom so that one day, by and by, obviously, he can come back and vindicate the martyrs at some unknown time, so far 2,000 years in the future, from those suffering Thessalonians. Last Thursday, I shared with you how Isaiah chapter 66 and 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 are not only parallel, but they demonstrate that Peter's promise of the day of the Lord, in which the earth and the elements therein would be burned up with fire. That's the day of the Lord of Isaiah 66. It is also the day of the Lord of the book of Revelation. Now, the significance of this, ladies and gentlemen, should be more than obvious. If it's true that the coming of the Lord in flaming fire is the coming of the Lord in flaming fire of 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, and it's the coming of the Lord of 2 Peter chapter 3, and it's the coming of the Lord of the book of Revelation, Revelation 20 through 22, then that means that the coming of the Lord of Revelation, the coming of the Lord of 2 Peter chapter 3, the coming of the Lord of 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 are all predictive of the coming of the Lord of Isaiah chapter 66. And of course, that means that the coming of the Lord of Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following, was likewise the coming of the Lord in flaming fire of Isaiah 66 of 2 Thessalonians chapter 1. But wait. Do you remember? We have demonstrated that Isaiah 66 would be the coming of the Lord in vindication of his martyrs, because his martyrs would be cast out of the synagogue. And 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 is the coming of the Lord, not just in vindication of the martyrs, ladies and gentlemen, but the coming of the Lord in vindication of the martyrs in the lifetime of the Thessalonians. It is a righteous thing with God to repay with tribulation those who are troubling you. By the way, keep in mind, that was not the Romans. The Romans did not begin persecuting the saints until 64 AD. So it's a righteous thing with God to repay with tribulation those who are, that's in the present participial form, ladies and gentlemen. They were then, 2,000 years ago, persecuting the Thessalonians, casting out of their synagogues, you know? And to give to you who are being troubled, again, the Greek word thalipsis, rest, relief, when the Lord Jesus is revealed from heaven. So here is the promise to living, breathing people who are being persecuted for their faith And the promise was given to them based upon Isaiah 66, that they, not some far off distant generation of unborn Christians, but they would receive relief from that then ongoing persecution when the Lord Jesus is revealed from heaven. Now, this is so important, ladies and gentlemen, because since 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 is so clearly echoing, drawing upon Isaiah chapter 66, and since, therefore, 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 was to be fulfilled in the lifetime of the first century Thessalonian saints in the first century generation, then that means that the coming of the Lord in flaming fire to take vengeance on the persecutors of the Thessalonians was the coming of the Lord to bring in the new creation. And that means 2 Peter 3 and Revelation 20 and Matthew 25, 31 and following was fulfilled in the first century generation. Now, I went over all of that to bring us back up to speed, to reiterate, to refresh in our minds how critical it is to see the connection between Isaiah 66, Matthew 25, 31 and following, 2 Thessalonians 1, 2 Peter 3, and Revelation. These are all talking about the same coming of the Lord. I consider it utterly ridiculous, not trying to be unkind, not trying to be too harsh, but I consider it utterly ridiculous to divorce 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 from Isaiah 66. I find it utterly ridiculous to divorce it from Matthew 23 and Jesus' promise of the vindication of all the righteous blood, of all of the righteous, all the way back to Abel. And that vindication was to be in the first century. I find it totally unacceptable, therefore, to divorce 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 from 2 Peter 3 and Revelation. And all of that means Matthew 25, 31, unless you want to completely divorce it, okay? Unless you want to completely divorce Matthew 25, 31 and following from Isaiah 66, 2 Thessalonians 1, 2 Peter 3, Revelation. That means Matthew 25 and the entirety of the Olivet-Discourse was fulfilled at the coming of the Lord, at the revelation of Jesus Christ from heaven in AD 70. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this morning's Morning Musings. Do not forget, fantastic book special, pardon me, for the rest of October 2022, U.S. orders only, my book, We Shall Meet Him in the Air, The Wedding of the King of Kings. When you order that by going to my website, donkpreston.com, bibleprophecy.com, beautiful tab right up the very top, you will get included with your order at not a dime extra, okay? Can God Tell Time and In Flaming Fire. Now listen, if you paid shipping on all three of those books, okay, that's $14. You're getting all three books delivered to you free of charge for $23.95. Period. End of story. Okay? I'm out of time. I will see you on the flip side.